Guys, there's a statistic that leaves me puzzled. 97% of this channel's viewers are men. But where are the women? I've received maybe one or two comments in the entire life of the channel from women, apart from Andrea Borman, whom I greet and congratulate for the interview that will remain in the history of Linux on YouTube. Epic, pure poetry. I recommend everyone watch it, because Andrea is a very spontaneous and genuine person in her expressions. The interesting thing is that among the tech channels I follow, there are several women who produce excellent content. Bread and Penguin, for example, makes really well-made videos. There are others who talk about Linux with competence and passion, all quality channels. But here's the point. Where are the women? I mean, among you, among normal users, the actual users, in the comments. Is it possible that only 3% of Linux users are women? And how come this percentage isn't even reflected in the comments? Out of 100 comments, I should have at least 3 from women. And that's not the case, at least apparently. I did a search on YouTube, and practically no one talks about this. Is it possible that no one has ever asked this question? This is not an ideological video. I'm not looking for culprits to ban. I don't want to do virtue signaling. I'm not interested in painting the channel pink or implementing quotas. What I'm genuinely wondering is ours a predominantly male world? Is our environment unintentionally hostile toward women? What's behind this percentage? Obviously, I don't have all the answers. With this video, I'm publicly voicing my doubts, trying to understand your point of view as well, and especially encouraging the women who are part of that 3% to comment and honestly share their opinion. However, as a history lover and firm believer that the past contains the answers to the questions we'll face in the future, I tried to recap the relationship between women and technology. And something surprising emerged, something I didn't know. You know what's the most absurd thing about all this? Women aren't absent from computing because it's not for them. They were literally driven out of a field that was initially almost entirely female. Let me tell you concrete, verifiable facts, not opinions. In 1943, the U.S. Army recruited a group of over 80 women mathematicians at the University of Pennsylvania. Their task, calculating ballistic trajectories by hand, complex differential equations that required more than 40 hours to solve. They were called computers. Yes, because computer was the name given to people who did calculations, and these people were almost all women. Then came ENIAC, Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, the first programmable digital electronic computer in history. Who was chosen to program it? 6 of these women: Betty Snyder, later Holberton; Kathleen McNulty; Jean Jennings, later Bartik; Marlon Weskoff, Frances Bylas, and Ruth Lichterman. And here comes the part that pisses me off. These 6 women were given the task of programming ENIAC by looking only at technical diagrams on paper, because initially they didn't even have security clearance to enter the room where the machine was located. No programming languages, no manuals, no guides, because they didn't exist yet. They had to invent everything from scratch. Jean Bartik, one of them, said, "The ENIAC was a son of a bitch to program." But they made it work. They developed concepts we still use today: subroutines, nesting, debugging techniques. These women literally crawled inside the machine to find defective vacuum tubes. There were 18,000 thermionic valves that burned out at a rate of almost 1 per day. And you know what happened when ENIAC was presented to the public in February 1946? The 6 programmers were not invited to the official ceremony. They were not invited to the celebration dinner. In press photos, they were cut out or presented as ENIAC girls, without even their names. Programming work was considered so clerical and mechanical that it didn't deserve public recognition. Hardware engineers John Mauchly and Presper Eckert were celebrated as geniuses. The women who had actually made that machine work, invisible for decades. And then there's Grace Hopper. This woman had a PhD in mathematics from Yale, enlisted in the Navy during World War II, and became one of the first 3 coders of the Mark I at Harvard, one of the first electromechanical computers in the United States. She wrote the first computer user manual in history, 561 pages. In 1949, she joined the Eckert-Mauchly team that was developing ENIAC, one of the first commercial computers. And here Grace Hopper did something revolutionary. In 1952, she invented the first compiler, the A0. What's a compiler? It's a program that translates instructions written in human language into machine code. But when she proposed this idea, they told her, "It will never work. Computers can only do arithmetic." She did it anyway. And she was right. In 1957, her team developed Flowmatic, the first programming language based on English words instead of mathematical symbols. Grace believed that programming should be accessible to everyone, not just mathematicians. And in 1959, she participated in the Codazzle consortium that created COBOL, Common Business-Oriented Language. In the 1970s, COBOL was the most widely used programming language in the world. Even today, in 2025, billions of lines of COBOL code run in banking and government systems around the world. Grace Hopper coined the term software engineering to describe her work. At first, her colleagues made fun of her. They said she was inflating the importance of her work. Today, software engineers are among the most sought-after and highest-paid professionals in the world. And then there's Margaret Hamilton. In the early 1960s, she was hired by MIT to work on SAGE, the first U.S. air defense system. In 1965, at 29 years old, she became head of the software engineering division at MIT Instrumentation Laboratory, the group that wrote the software for NASA's Apollo program. Let me give you an idea of what this meant. Margaret Hamilton and her team had to write the software for the Apollo 11 onboard computers with less power than a modern pocket calculator. The code had to be perfect on the first try because there were no software updates in space. There's a famous photo from 1969 showing Margaret Hamilton standing next to a stack of printed code as tall as she is, all the code her team had written for the lunar missions. That woman, with her glasses and professorial air, had literally written the software that would take human beings to the moon. And on July 20th, 1969, during the Apollo 11 landing, it was precisely the error detection and recovery systems that Hamilton had insisted on including, against the advice of many, that saved the mission. When alarms 1201 and 1202 went off 3 minutes before landing, the computer was overloaded. But Hamilton's software recognized the problem, prioritized critical operations, and allowed Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to land safely. Margaret Hamilton received the Medal of Freedom from President Obama in 2016. She was 80 years old. She had waited almost half a century for public recognition of her work. So, if women dominated programming in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s, what happened? This happened. In the late 1960s, industry and government realized that software was worth money. Lots of money. The Apollo missions, commercial computer development, everything depended on software. And suddenly what had been considered clerical and mechanical work, compared to typing and sewing, became skilled and prestigious work. And when a job becomes prestigious and well-paid, the dynamics of who accesses it tend to change. In 1967, a study by two psychologists, William Cannon and Dallas Perry, created what they called the ideal programmer profile. Basing their work mainly on men in their tests, they concluded that the best programmers were people with antisocial tendencies, who didn't like interacting with others. This study became the basis for aptitude tests used to hire programmers for decades. Guess what? These tests systematically favored men and eliminated women, who statistically showed more empathy and social inclinations. Universities began requiring computer science degrees for programming jobs, when many of the women who had literally invented the field didn't have these degrees because they didn't exist when they had started working. Tech magazines began publishing articles about how natural it was for men to program. Cosmo in 1967 published an article titled "The Computer Girls," which, while seeming positive, included phrases like, "And we like having the girls around. They're prettier than the rest of us," said by an anonymous male programmer. In the 70s and 80s, when the first personal computers arrived on the market, they were marketed as toys for boys. Radio Shack, Apple, Commodore, all advertised exclusively to males. Computers were put in the rooms of male children, not female children. Parents bought computers for their sons twice as often as for their daughters. And Hollywood did the rest. In the movies of the 80s, Revenge of the Nerds, Weird Science, War Games, the programmer was always a socially inadequate male nerd who used technology to get the girl. This stereotype became so deeply rooted in the culture that it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. But here's the problem. We're no longer in the 60s, much less the 80s. Looking at today's society, I see it as much more emancipated. Female figures are everywhere, often even in a predominant way or equal to that of males. Yet in the technological and computing field, I don't perceive this situation, and it's strange. The numbers don't lie. In 1960, more than 1 in 4 programmers were women, 27% according to U.S. government statistics. In the 1970s, the number of women studying computer science continued to grow. In 1984, it reached its peak. 37% of computer science graduates were women. And then suddenly, after 1984, it crashed. Today we're at 18%. Computer science is the only STEM discipline where the percentage of women has decreased in the last 40 years. All the others, physics, chemistry, biology, engineering, have seen an increase in female presence. Only computer science has gone in the opposite direction. I honestly don't know if the cause of all this is discrimination against women. Truthfully, I don't think that's the only reason. But think about it. Today, in 2025, almost all disciplines that were once predominantly male have seen a significant increase in female presence. Soccer comes to mind, for example. Yet in the field of computing, female presence remains marginal. So I wonder, maybe computing simply isn't interesting to women. Maybe they're looking for something else in life rather than arguing about X11 versus Wayland. Or have we actually created a hostile environment, even without realizing it? Is there now a cultural divide so deep it's become tangible? Honestly, I can't give myself a precise and comprehensive answer. What interests me is not to moralize to anyone. It's just an attempt to face a historical and cultural reality. Women were there. They absolutely were there. And at a certain point, they almost completely disappeared from the official narrative of computing. And if today my channel has 97% male audience, perhaps it's just the echo of that history. For me, this is first and foremost a cultural, almost anthropological issue. Understanding how an environment is formed, how its codes crystallize, who feels at home and who doesn't. Linux, free software, the open source world should by definition be open spaces, where what matters is what you know how to do and what you want to learn, not who you are. And yet, looking at the numbers, something clearly doesn't add up. I'm genuinely surprised that so few have ever raised this question. I'm not looking for culprits, and I'm not looking for magic solutions. What interests me is opening an adult conversation, based on facts and history, about how we want the community to be in the next 20 years. Because if there's one thing we've learned from the history of computing, it's that when there are diverse voices, diverse sensibilities, diverse experiences within a field, technology makes enormous strides forward. I hope this video has made you discover something you didn't know, or made you look at our world with a different eye. See you in the next video.